Hey folks, Coach Patrick here, Endurance Nation. Welcome back to another coach video, coach podcast. This week, I'm going to be talking to you exclusively about key workouts before the Boston Marathon. Those of you who love running, are into all running. If you're not into an uproar about the decision to change the Olympic qualifying standard to being the standard and not top three places at US trials, which I think totally sucks, but that's a conversation for another episode. You are probably thinking about Boston. We have many people inside Endurance Nation who train and run Boston, runners and multi-sport athletes alike. Boston remains one of those high-profile destinations for people to go and not only test their fitness against the world's best, but to also against one of the I guess most renowned courses that's out there. But it's important to also remember that Boston is an experience in and of itself. You learn it not only just by qualifying and sort of seeing the energy around it, but getting to the city and seeing how the city embraces the race, and then going to the expo and seeing an expo that's like 10 times larger than pretty much any other marathon expo you might go to, kind of gives you a glimpse of what's happening. And then obviously when you're out there before the race with all those thousands of people in the tiny town of Hopkinton and kind of sort of maneuvering and getting a sense of the energy and the tradition that's associated with the event, and ultimately the race itself. I've done it 6 times now. Fortunate enough to do that, and it's quite an experience. There's no other race you'll do where there's spectators literally the entire way. I think there's like 2 places in the first couple miles where there's maybe not so many spectators. That goes for cold weather, hot weather, wet weather. It's just a fantastic event. The energy is amazing. And so before I even dive into these key workouts, if this is your first Boston Marathon, train, get fit, do all those things, but don't stress, have fun. You never get your first Boston Marathon back. I never get a chance to experience it. And if you're all dorked out running between people and getting annoyed at folks who are pulling off to the side to take a picture, then you're really kind of missing the point of what this race is. And honestly, your first time through is such a massive learning experience that it would really be to your own detriment to not be paying attention to everything that's going on around you, in addition to I think really to be able to put into context the data you'll be getting back, saying like, okay, my heart rate and my pace is a little lower here. What's going on? If you remember, oh yeah, in mile 8, there was this sort of thing happening, which is why, or I missed an aid station, etc. There's so many nuances to the course, nuances to the race itself, how it's put on, how the corrals roll out, the point-to-point nature of the race, the timing during the day. There's all sort of different elements that after you do it the first time, you're going to want to go back. You're going to want to do it better, and you will be able to do it better. But a huge part of that is being able to sort of capture everything that you know about that first race. So please don't ruin your first race by being a total running dork, okay? You can ruin all the other ones, just not the first one, all right? Okay, so my critical Boston Marathon workouts, I jotted them down for you guys, so I want to be able to talk about them just because I think there's this fascination with the marathon distance and a fascination with 2 elements in the running community that I don't necessarily agree with. And it's part of my methodology, whether or not you believe it or not. So number one is sort of this focus on total mileage. Elite runners run a lot. But the important thing to remember about elite runners is that they don't run for as long as you do. Right. So I consider I've qualified for Boston a couple of times. I'm a relatively fast runner. My PR is just under the 3-hour mark. And I'm relatively fast, but I am nowhere near as fast as these elite runners, right? I'm running just 3 hours. The average like competitive male age group run is in like the 240s, and the elites in Boston are running sub 230, right? Well, for those folks to go out and do a long run, they're doing long runs at like 5:45, 6 minute per mile pace. So if they do a long run, let's say they do a 2-hour long run, right? They cover at 6 minute miles, they're covering 20 miles, right? In their long run. When I go do a 20-mile long run and I'm doing it at my 7:30 pace, right? Riding 90 seconds per mile for 20 miles, right? So that's 20 minutes, that's 30 minutes longer. So my 20 miler is 2.5 hours. And those extra half hours, right? For me and for you and for everyone else, whatever that extra may be, added on to the end of that run is super costly, right? The end of each run is more costly than the beginning of the run to your body, and those longer runs more so. And so a fascination on running mileage really is detrimental to folks who are sort of middle or back of the pack, because for those of us who exist in those spaces, it just means following that mileage-oriented focus, following that obsession means that we are just running more miles, we're running more costly miles. So we have to find a way to become better without abusing ourselves and really creating problems and having overuse injuries and inability to recover, etc., from all these extra run miles. So number one is that obsession on miles that I have an issue with. The number two obsession I have with sort of general long distance running is how people pace events, and I'll talk a little bit about that in one of my key workouts. But I'm a fundamental believer that pacing is something that yields better performances overall, particularly on race day. And while you'll do a myriad of different runs in your training program, there's a couple key workouts you want to do that will help prepare you for your race. And ultimately, something we can do in our long runs, almost in every long run, that will help us prepare mentally for the rigors of being successful in a marathon race day. Okay, so let's dive in. No waiting here. Hold on. Let me take a quick sip from our non-sponsor here, a little bit of coffee. So the first run that I think is super important is a midweek tempo run done at half marathon pace. Okay, why half marathon pace? Why midweek? What's the story? Well, again, we have to fit a long run into our marathon schedule. That's a given, right? And depending where you are in your program, that run may be of any particular distance or duration. But midweek, we can work in another decent run. It's far enough away from the weekends, but it's done at half marathon pace, so it's not so costly that it ruins any speed or hill or other work you may be doing midweek. That's also far away from your weekend long run. And it's just enough to add some significant volume to your program. So you could eventually say, if you're training for a marathon and your long run is going to be 20 miles, because I said that before, I'm just making that up, right? 2.5 hours, which is generally my recommended. We don't run further than 2.5 hours guideline. When I think about that 2.5 hours and I say 20 miles, then my midweek tempo run usually is around 10 miles. So half of my long run distance. So when I'm in my peak weeks, I'm getting 20 miles in the weekend. I'm getting 10 miles at the midweek long run. And then I've got other runs around that. It could be a 45 or 50 mile week, which is a big week, I think, for an average runner, particularly someone who's competing at Boston. And that midweek tempo run done predominantly at half marathon pace helps us do a couple things. One is it helps you anchor an effort that is faster than your goal marathon pace. So if your goal marathon pace is, say, 8-minute miles, your half marathon pace is probably closer to like 7:30 or 7:25. So doing runs at 7:30, 7:25 allow you to build some, not only the physical strength, but the mental focus and acuity required to run faster. And if you're able to run 10 miles faster than your goal marathon pace in training, in race day, that I know you can probably run 15 or 16 miles at, like, say, 5 seconds faster than your goal marathon pace, which comes up to my next workout, which I'm getting to in a second, right? So ultimately, you need to be able to run faster than your goal pace in order to run that goal pace on race day. But we do it in training. We don't want to go crazy on race day, but we do it in training, and it's that midweek tempo run done at half marathon pace. It's a great run. Some people make it a fartlek. It's fun to do with your friends. It's a counterpart to sort of that long, more aerobically focused weekend run. It's an opportunity for you to run with strength, but not so much so that you're accumulating so much fatigue that it ruins your other sessions. So midweek tempo run done at half marathon pace, typically building anywhere from, say, it might be an 8-mile run that's got 6 miles at half marathon pace, eventually building up to, say, a 12 mile run with the bulk of those miles, 10 miles max, for example, at that half marathon pace. Okay. So it's something to think about as you get into running. It's just getting comfortable running fast and getting into that skill set. I think a lot of people end up sort of on either end of the spectrum, running really, really fast in speed workouts, and then running really, really slow in the long workouts. And they're missing that middle piece, which is a great place to accrue training stress, training load, but not in a way that really damages the rest of your weekly workouts. Okay. All right. So I mentioned earlier that we don't necessarily want to run faster than race pace on race day. And there's a caveat with that. So that's my second workout, which I think is super important before Boston. And that is your race simulation workout. Super hard training for Boston, being the winter time. We're indoors, we're outdoors, temperatures are crazy, and you never know what you're going to get in April in Boston. But race simulation workouts are a great way for you to prepare to execute to your best. Okay. So what is a race simulation workout? Inside Endurance Nation, your race simulation workout is basically 5 miles at 15 seconds slower per mile than your target pace. So let's go back to our 8-minute target pace runner. Our 8-minute target pace runner will do 5 miles at 8:15, right? So they end up, by the time they hit the 5-mile mark, they are 5 times 15 or 75 seconds behind their target pace for the marathon. Okay. Oh my God, 75 seconds. What will I do? Right. Then they will run the next 15 miles at 5 seconds per mile faster than their target pace, just 5 seconds. So on average, that will be 7:55s. So if they run 15 miles at 5 seconds faster, that's 75 seconds back, We have now arrived at mile 20 on target for our pace and doing it in a way that allowed us to have a nice sort of build into the race in the beginning, the first 5 miles, not too fast, just on point. Then 15 miles really steady. By the time you hit mile 20, things are starting to get tough, no lie, right? But at the same time, you are on schedule and you've got 6.2 miles, 10 kilometers to go to be your best to hit your target at the finish. And I think people can kind of mentally wrap their head around 10K, right? 10K is watching a great episode of TV, right? Just take out the commercial part. 10K is something you can count down. 10K is something you can work with. It's hard to work with. I'm going to pace the next 16 miles like this, like only 16 miles to go. That's not great, right? Those are the things the spectators are yelling at you, and you're in the race saying, please shut up. I know you're lying. I'm not almost there, right? So when you think about getting into the race rehearsal portion, we run that same type of program, right? So we'll have a beginning section that's slower. We'll have a middle section that's just slightly faster. And then we'll have a little bit at the end, a little faster. So your race rehearsal inside Endurance Nation is typically 18 miles. And I recommend that people do run the 18 miles, even if you're a slower runner. So if you do go past that 2.5 hour mark, you may need to add in some additional recovery or a day or two of recovery, like time off. I said it, time off, just so your body can handle the load. But at the end of the day, it works out being something along the lines of, say 4 or 5 miles, depending where you are on the spectrum, 4 or 5 miles at that easier pace. Then we get, say 10 miles or 12 or 11 miles, say. So if we did 5, 11, that's 16, we got 2 miles left to go, right? So I would go 5 miles easy, dial in that pace, effort, heart rate, feel good. Middle section, we'll go 12 or 11 miles with that, say. So we double it, right? So now at 11 miles at just faster than race pace, so run our 11 miles at 7:55 pace, getting the sense of what it's like to run that pace up a hill, down a hill, etc. And the key part with that, I'll get to that in a second, is not necessarily doing the steadiest run, right? Okay. And then finally, the last 2 miles you have left, because you've done 5, you've done 11, you've got 2 miles left. That's where you can kind of pick up the pace and finish strong. All right. So that race simulation workout allows you to test your pacing, allows you to check your metrics, see what your heart rate looks like at that pace, see how you feel at that pace, see how you need to fuel, etc. And you can find out how hard it is to run those middle miles. More on that in a second. And then finally, you get to push a little bit at the end. We're going to get some really good data back from that. We're going to see how your body handles it. And we have an opportunity to really test how you were able to implement that plan, right? Because there's great athletes and there's great plans. It's rare that we have great athletes and great plans come together. So these race rehearsals are an opportunity for us to kind of move things around, learn a little bit about from our experience, and then decide, okay, this next time I'll do something differently. So inside Endurance Nation, we typically have 1 race rehearsal run. You may want to have 2 race rehearsal runs. These are done about 4 weeks out max from your race, which is sort of your last big long run, because it's a hard run. It's not the longest run you might do, but it's a hard run. And we want to be able to kind of dial things back. So as you get closer to your race, you can still do some race pace running or race simulation. Like instead of doing 18 miles, you might do a 13-mile race simulation to kind of dial in those paces and heart rate. But 4 weeks out is the key workout. So let's just dive in for a second. We're going to dive into that middle section, those 11 miles in this workout, or in the case of a race, those 15 miles, just faster than race pace. What does it mean to run just faster than race pace in Boston? Or quite frankly, in any neighborhood. And I think one of the neat parts about Boston is the terrain itself, which adds a different dynamic to it. It's actually net downhill, but it is rolling. So there'll be plenty of times on the course where you are absolutely going up, but you are net downhill into mile 17 before the hills of Newton, where from mile 17 through mile 22-ish, it's quite uphill, decidedly, with some downhills in there. And then it's downhill again to the finish. And that section of hills there really kind of annihilates people. So how do you run well with your pacing, given the conditions that you're in Boston, or perhaps if you live in a rolling area? The key part is to understand the nuances of the terrain, right? So let's say we're running at 8-minute miles down the road, and all of a sudden the road starts to go up. If you're going to be running it at 8-minute miles, and the road starts to go up, the natural tendency is to push harder, to push against the slowing, to say, you know what, I'm going to keep running 8s despite the fact that someone decided to come along in the ice age and put this hill here, right? Well, you start doing that process, and what happens is you're actually running significantly harder than you were earlier, and you'll see the heart rate to start to elevate. If you're running with a power meter, like a Stride power meter, our partners at Stride, you will see that those power numbers start to go up. That means that 8-minute pace up that hill is actually much more costly than your 8-minute pace was on the flats before you entered that hill. Now, of course, one of the big things to think about, and you need to look at the course map yourself, but you'll see that what goes up must come down. And so if that hill goes up and you have to run up that hill, then you get to run down that hill as well. And so for me, the way I want you to think about it is I'm running 8-minute miles on the flats. I hit this hill. All of a sudden, I'm running that same effort, but I'm going up a hill. So now I'm running 8:10s. I see some 8:12s. I do half a mile at like 8:10 up this hill. But when I get to the top of that hill starts to go down, or eventually it will go down. When that hill goes down, instead of going back to my 7:55 pace, which I was running before, I lost 15 seconds for half a mile, right? I might run at 7:40 pace because I'm going downhill. And I let the downhill time be the time that I make up the time that I lost on that uphill, right? So I kind of just do some mental math. And if you know the course, you can see it, but you can sort of say, okay, here comes the hill. Look at my watch, not for the heart rate necessarily, not for the pace. Just look at the time. Like, okay, I'm at 1:32:15, right? Run up your hill, you get to the top and you say, I'm at 1:35:15. I had to keep it easy for myself. I'm not so good at math. So 3 minutes. Okay, I've got to find 3 minutes where I can run, faster than my goal pace. And we achieve that on the downhill. Rather than really elevating our effort and focusing, going super hard up that hill and getting to the downhill and saying, oh dear God, I need to slow down now. My heart rate's so elevated. My heart rate monitor's been beeping at me this whole time. I need to recover. So I'm going to really ease back and take off. We can't afford to have that sort of spike in effort on the hill and the decrease in effort on the downhill. Over time, that variable nature of pacing becomes extremely costly. And so we use the uphills and downhills to our advantage. So that's something you can practice in your race simulation, is getting used to what it means to average out your pace accordingly over the hills by monitoring your effort and pacing yourself accordingly. If you're fortunate enough to have something like a power meter, a stride power meter, running with that, you'll actually see the power numbers. You could say, I'm going to run my endurance, my marathon pace wattage, say that's 225 watts. If you run 225 watts and you hit a hill and you start going up that hill, you just keep it at 225. You will slow down because you're staying at the same power. And then once you get over the top of that hill, you stay at 225 and you will speed up because it's more power than you need to go downhill. And the power lets you essentially flatten out that hill, which is what I'm asking you to do on race day. Okay. If you have questions about that, be sure to put them in the comments. I'll be happy to dive in more detail. All right. Now, the final and third workout that I think is super important for Boston, and this is based on personal experience myself, is doing some downhill strides. I don't need you to do miles and miles of downhill running, but we do need you to get comfortable and competent at running downhill. When I say Boston is net downhill, it's not the downhills that necessarily kill you. It's the variety between the downs and the ups. So you've got, say, 17 miles net downhill, which is a lot of downhill running, which is essentially you're almost kind of braking, using your quads a little bit to kind of break your momentum as you're running downhill. It's a natural reaction. So your quads have been sort of resisting, and then you hit these hills, and now it's time to go. You need those quads to engage. So they say, okay, we'll flip the switch. We'll go from this sort of eccentric braking motion to this engaged, active pushing motion, getting up the hill. And you get over the top, now you're going down the hill past Boston College. You're going to go over on Beacon, and you're going to start heading down towards Kenmore Square. That's again downhill, and your quads want to go back to that braking motion, and you can't do it. Your quads are toast. And that's because you just have not become efficient at running downhill. And there's a balance. There's a speed to body position to cadence or run turnover position that's optimal, and it's something to practice at. So instead of just doing regular strides in your training plan, I encourage you to work in some downhill strides. You can start off on just an easy 1 or 2% grade downhill, which you'll notice because the speed will be easier, the power and the effort, the heart rate effort will be lower because it's downhill. So pick a nice downhill space and just do 30-second repeats, right? Go downhill running fast, just kind of keeping yourself in control, jog back up, right? Downhill running fast, jog back up. Eventually you can work your way to slightly steeper and steeper hills, nothing more than say 4%. But 30 seconds to 40 seconds is kind of a max downhill time I would run, and just really work on getting comfortable. Is it a hand position thing? For me, speeding up my feet means shortening my hand stride. So instead of holding my hands out like this and having a longer stride, I might actually bring my hand up and have a much shorter stride. Faster hands means faster feet. I would need to work on, getting my my torso forward, thinking about my chest leading the way down the hill, kind of finding that space. That repeated downhill stride motion, just bursts of it, not lots and lots of downhill running, means that you will develop competency and fluency such that when you are running downhill, you'll be able to understand the difference between I'm in my downhill running position and I'm not. And that in and of itself, the physical adaptation and the mental focus and the ability to assume that downhill running position will combine to make you successful. Some people go nuts with strength training and other types of work to prepare yourselves for Boston. I don't think you need to go that far, but I do think that competency is critical of importance. Okay. So my 3 key workouts for you guys is that midweek half marathon tempo run, typically done on say a Wednesday. If you've got a Saturday long run, you could push it to Thursday if you're a Sunday long runner. We've got that race simulation workout where you practice that smart start, 15 seconds slower per mile, and then that slightly faster, 5 seconds faster per mile middle section where we really flatten the run and be strong and get used to running faster than race pace in that position. And we finish that last little bit. And then finally, the downhill strides workout. You can do downhill strides 2 or 3 times a week. They could be a 3 or 4 mile run with just a couple downhill repeats in it. That's all you need. Okay. This has been Coach Patrick from Endurance Nation. I hope you've enjoyed this podcast. If you have more questions about Boston Marathon, pacing strategy, etc., Google my name and Boston Marathon. You'll see lots of information come up, or head over to our Facebook page, facebook.com/Endurance Nation. I'll be happy to dive through, answer your questions, and get you ready for Boston, whatever your preparation may be. All right. Have a great time out there. I look forward to seeing your finish line photos online. See ya.